Hi. Hi, how are you? That's good. I just... don't believe all of that, or what he said. But good afternoon, everybody. Great pleasure to be here, to be back in Amsterdam. And what I wanted to do today was to share with you some of the work we're doing about cities and technology. What some people call smart cities, we don't like the name. We like to call it more like sensible cities. And while Timo was speaking, actually, I added this slide in the presentation because it is true. Design is about changing our world. It's about inventing tomorrow. But predicting the future can be a very dangerous business. And actually, what you see here, is actually something that the Boston Globe tried to do, I believe on the 24th of December of 1900, tried to predict how life could be in the 20th century. And if you read that, you see that most of those predictions are actually wrong. So it's very difficult to actually try to see how things will be today. But what we can do, we can actually use design as a way to promote mutations in our present environment, and then see how those mutations will propagate. A little bit like what happens with evolution and natural selection. Now, one example of a very failed prediction of the future is the following one. If you look at this picture, this is something people used to be really fascinated in the 1990s. People thought that the world, our world, would become increasingly virtual. So much so that many people, including a guy called Gilder, brought and said the cities would disappear. This is Gilder, 1995. We are headed for the death of cities. Cities are leftover baggage from the industrial era. And again, no prediction could have been more wrong. This poor guy wrote it like 20 years ago, and now every time I mention it, other people mention it, so he probably is, he shouldn't be very happy about this, but that point is very difficult to try to see how things will be, but we can use design actually to do incremental changes to our present environment. Now, so cities haven't disappeared. That's an image from China. China itself, this century, is planning to build more cities than all of humanity ever built. We know that half of the world's population lives in cities now, actually over half, and then that number by 2030 could swell to almost 5 billion. So what has happened is that the digital and all the things that Gilder and others were talking about hasn't killed physical space, but actually digital and physical are kind of recombining. It's almost like the world of bits and atoms coming together with us in the middle and creating this hybrid condition, what some people call smart cities and that we like to call more sensible cities, because it's not about technology, it's really about how to make cities more sensible and how to look at the human side of them. Now, a lot of this happens through two key components, which is how we collect information from cities, digital information, and how we respond to that. It comes from sensing and actuating, which is what every dynamic system does and what every living system does. When we meet each other, we sense each other, we collect information from each other, and we respond to that information. A lot of this is happening at the urban scale, and I want to share with you some examples and some projects that show that. The first project I want to share with you is something we did using that computer. Now, if you look at that computer today, you know everything about it. Every chip in it, you know where it was produced, how it moved on the planet, how it became that machine. However, a few years from now, you stop using that machine, you throw it away, and you know very little about it. Sometimes this is what happens to it. A lot of electronics, e-waste from the United States is shipped illegally to Asia, from Europe to Africa. So our idea was, what if you could actually design a little tag that we could put on trash and start following trash? A bit like when you go to a hospital, they put a tracer in your blood and it follows through your body. How could you do the same thing at the scale of a city? So this is the first deployment we did in the city of Seattle. Could we have the sound? We had 500 people, 3,000 pieces of trash. Every possible thing, e-waste and other different, every possible piece of trash. And then after tagging all of them, we started following them. So you see the day of deployment in the city of Seattle. Then after a couple of days, you see some of the main landfills next to Seattle. Then actually, big surprise, how far things started to travel. Sometimes in crazy way. Look at the trace that went to Chicago and then down to Baja California. And still moving after 1 week, 2 weeks, a month, even 2 months. We thought the Farewell Symphony was the music we needed. So what can you do with this? The first thing you can do when you got all this information, you are an engineer, you put your engineer's hat on it, and then you can actually use it to optimize the system. Think about how much energy could actually be saved in the system by actually making some of those traces and those movements less cumbersome, more optimized. The other thing that's very important is that this huge amount of data, what some people call big data in cities, can be shared with people, and then with all of us. And then at that point, it can promote behavioral change. Something quite exciting was at the end of the project, somebody came to us and said, you know, I used to drink water in plastic bottles every day, and then put them outside my door and forget about them. And now, after the project, I actually know that they go to a landfill a few miles from home. They will stay there forever. And so because of this, I actually stopped drinking water in plastic bottles. So the idea that all this information can actually promote behavioral change and help us better understand the conditions of the environment and the cities around ourselves. There's a third thing we discovered that was actually more recently, and that's when a burglar came to our lab at MIT. And the poor guy stole a lot of things, including some of the tags that tell you where they go. And this is what happened. So some of the tags, we also had some computer that would take picture of you if you move. So this is what happened. This was after a project at MoMA in New York. All right, so this is about how you can track. If you can track trash, you can really put sensors almost everywhere. And all this information, as I was saying, can be very important for people, for citizens, to take action in the city. This is what we are doing, for instance, in Hong Kong and Shenzhen. Pollution is a big problem in China in general. And so we're actually using people as probes to measure air pollution in the city and share that information. Well, these were two examples of how we can put sensors onto things, in the city and distribute it. But a lot of data actually is data that comes from the things we just use in our everyday life. This, just to give you a sense of how much information we have in the cell phone network. If you just look at milliseconds or microseconds, you see how much information we generate, even without thinking about it. And we'll not show the whole video, but it shows you just an incredible amount of data we generate. And then if you use it And if you analyze it, you can actually do interesting things. Actually, one of the oldest projects we did, but I want to show it today, is a project where we look at cell phone information for a large amount of people, for millions of people in Rome, and look at what happened during the final of the Soccer World Cup in 2006. That is before the match, as you see people moving here and there in the city in Rome. Then the match begins, a silence, nobody talks anymore. France scores, Italy scores. Halftime, people make a call and go to the bathroom. And then the second half, you might recall Zidane, the headbutt in a moment, to the first overtime, the second overtime, the headbutt by Zidane, and then Italy wins. And then everybody goes to the center. You will see a big peak over there, so all the people moving there. And then by the following day again, the prime minister, the winning team, met the population in the city, talking about cell phones. And only the center, then by the end of the day, you see a big peak at the Circo Massimo, a place where since Roman times people go to have outdoor parties and to celebrate. So the idea is all this information can really tell us a lot about the city and how it lives, almost as a living organism. There's actually a beautiful visualization by Pedro Cruz, who was in our lab at MIT. It's Lisbon, by taking billion and billion data points from the taxi network, and it shows how the city really lives and comes to life in the morning, and then all the traffic and the traffic jams and how it really moves. And when you have all this data, then you can start analyzing it. So talking about taxis, what you see here is New York City. That's actually the airport. That's JFK Airport. And you see for every dot, you got a pick up and a drop off. Here you see the same thing across the whole city. And then you can ask yourself, well, what if people could actually share a trip? What would happen? Now, we couldn't do it a few years ago because we didn't have real-time information, but now in your pocket, you can just use an app in order to see how you could share mobility. This is actually happening across the world. So our question from a mathematical point of view was, well, how many taxis would you need if you wanted to take everybody to destination exactly when they need to be there, give or take maybe a couple of minutes, but actually by sharing more the infrastructure? And well, you do a lot of mathematics to analyze it, and you cannot use, this is the field of big data, you cannot use traditional algorithms, so you need to develop new type of analysis. But the amazing thing you find is that you could actually design a system in your city just for taxis, where you could actually take everybody to their destination when they need to be there, but just using, say, a little over half of the cars. So basically, imagine how much pollution, traffic, and so on you could remove, how you could use the infrastructure better and still bring everybody to destination when they need to be there. Now, this shows you how we can really get all this information from the city, analyze it, and use it to understand the urban system better. The same thing is also happening much closer to us. It's happening with our bodies, with what is called quantified self. It's happening in our cars, because here we're talking about traffic. In the next project, for instance, what we are doing is look at sensors in the car and how they can help us better understand what happens with the driver, and in particular, the frustration that we have when we drive. There was an accident that wasn't planned in the movie.
The drive. It was incredibly stressful. It was the most stressful drive I've ever been on. Nevertheless, I think we have a lot of great content to measure road frustration, because I'm certainly frustrated at this point.
And we're off. Jesus. God. Okay.
Stop the car.
So we were just sideswiped. And right now my stress level should be through the roof. We've got the information, we'll have to process the data and see where it's really at.
Shit. Jesus.
So, well, we know a lot of things about the city, all this data about the city. Then we got all this incredible amount of data from the car. The city is becoming more intelligent, the car is becoming more intelligent, and at the intersection of these two things, something quite amazing is going to happen. And that is self-driving cars. Now, we're not interested in self-driving cars because you don't need to keep your hands on the steering wheel. That's not the point. Self-driving cars are a reality. You have them in the United States, on the road, being tested. Google has some, MIT has some, many other universities and companies are developing or have developed some. But the interesting thing is that when you go to a self-driving car, and this is what you see, how the self-driving car scans the environment and see the world around itself, a bit like the human eye using a LiDAR, which is like a three-dimensional scan of the world around. It's like the Kinect. On a broader scale, well, when you got that, something quite exciting is going to happen at the city level. Because if you go self-driving cars, in the morning the car can give you a lift to your office. And then they can give a lift, instead of staying idle in a parking spot, can give a lift to somebody else in your family or to anybody else in the city. So what you're actually doing, you're totally blurring the distinction between public transportation and private transportation. And if you do the calculation, if you combine what we saw before about sharing the ride, if people want to share, you don't need to force anybody, but if people want to share the ride, maybe to minimize cost, that we saw before for taxis in New York City. And if you combine that with the ability that you have with self-driving cars to actually use the same car on multiple trips, then what you have effectively, you can run a city such as New York, or Amsterdam, or London, or Singapore. You can run a full city by taking everybody to destination with 20% of the cars you have today. You take out 4 cars out of 5, and you're still able to run the city efficiently. Well, when every car will be then self-driving, that will take a bit longer. According to some prediction, will not be before 2040 or 2050. But then, when that happens, also other things are going to change. For instance, the traffic light was invented over 100 years ago, and has been the main mode to negotiate access to an intersection. But then you can think about something else. You can think about a system where cars magically mix at the intersection without bumping into each other, without the need of stopping. Something like this. Sorry. Oh, I pressed the wrong button. Yeah. Now, don't try it yet. But this is what you could do. Now, and I got still 3 or 4 minutes. I wanted to finish with another project. This is interesting about mobility. Yes, we can use the car infrastructure in a much more efficient way, but ultimately there's much better ways of moving in the city, and especially human power mobility. And this is a project I wanted to share with you today because it's a project we did in Copenhagen. But Copenhagen, like Amsterdam, is actually a beautiful place where people use a lot of bicycles. Actually, in Copenhagen, between 30 to 50% of all trips every day happen by bicycle instead of other modes of transportation. And so, this is what you see, as you see in Amsterdam as well, a lot of bicycles, even bicycle jams. So we started working with the mayor, and we developed this idea, can we actually have a bicycle where just by retrofitting a wheel, that bicycle can become, first of all, an e-bike. You brake, it gets your energy, and then it gives it back to you, but also allows you to be online. And then it can monitor your torque, your health. It can share that information with friends. It can measure air pollution and so on. And so that was the idea. We developed it with the mayor in Copenhagen. Here is the mayor, the former mayor now. I want to share with this also because that's something that, as designers, we always design an object, a prototype, but then the question is how to develop it further. And more, you don't have a client. You do a project that you like Trash Track. We started with that. We didn't have a client. In this project, yes, we had the city of Copenhagen, but didn't have a client who wanted to produce it. But more and more, it becomes easy to go on Kickstarter or to just develop a startup. In this case, there's a startup that was started called Super Pedestrian that's actually doing very well in terms of having raised a lot of funds in order to do the wheel. And it's actually now producing the system.
This is the Copenhagen Wheel. It turns your ordinary bicycle into a smart electric hybrid by simply replacing your back wheel. Connect it to your smartphone, download the app, and you're ready to go. Bicycles are a great way to move around, yet sometimes distances are too long, hills can get in the way, and hard journeys to work may leave you covered in sweat. The Copenhagen Wheel is here to change all of that. The technology was developed over several years at MIT, together with the city of Copenhagen, one of the world's most innovative places for cycling. Its original inventors licensed the technology and founded Super Pedestrian, the startup where we are now working around the clock to bring the wheel to you. Like the best riding companion, The Copenhagen Wheel learns how you pedal and integrates seamlessly with your motion. It captures your energy when you brake or go downhill and gives you a push when you need it with 3 to 10 times your regular foot power. It's easy. Ride it just like a normal bike. As you pedal, the motor automatically kicks in with no additional throttles or buttons. All technology for the Copenhagen Wheel is contained within the red casing, including motor, removable batteries, wireless connectivity, smart locking, multiple sensors, and an embedded control system. Use your smartphone to customize your ride, monitor your physical activity, gather information from your environment to share with your friends and fellow cyclists. And if you're a software developer, you can even create your own biking apps. So whether you carry yourself, your kids, or your gear, hills seem flat, distances shrink, and you can cycle just about anywhere. So transform your bike and transform the city. The Copenhagen Wheel.
Thank you. I'll stop here.
It's fantastic, very inspiring, Carlo. So firstly, there was a little question came over our Twitter, which was on the trash tag question. And it was actually just, we couldn't probably see the full map. But did the components actually stay within the US continent, or did they go outside? That was a simple question. Really.
Actually, that's a great point, and it's a great question. What we did there with the tags, and we had to engineer the tags. We couldn't, at the beginning, we couldn't find anything off the shelf we could actually use on crash. And if you want, the tag is almost like a miniature cell phone. So we had to design it and engineer it, and that is fine. But then you need to put a data plan on it. So in that deployment, we actually had to use a local US data plan. So we looked at inside the United States. But as a new deployment we did recently, it will actually go live on our website soon. So if you check it out, we actually look at the international flows. And there you discover quite extraordinary things, including some of the smuggling that happens, with that goes where it shouldn't go. So, and that will go, it's not yet public, but it will go on the website soon. As I said, no, you need to track in a different way. In this case, just by the structure of the cell phone network, it was limited to the United States.
And I think one of the questions that I had is because, you know, there's a lot going on in wrestling with this big data and visualizing this big data. And you are absolutely at the heart of what's going on here. But is there a risk that this becomes an end in itself? And soon we've got lots of competing visualizations, which in themselves almost obscure then what we're really trying to achieve. It all becomes, that becomes the end.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think, you know, from the point of view of big data, you know, it is really knowing a lot about our environment. So the first thing you want to do is visualize it to understand what's going on. Otherwise, you got terabytes or petabytes of data that, you know, are zeros and one, but you cannot figure out what, you know, even what they mean. And then you want to analyze it to understand, you know, how you could use, for instance, the data from the taxis in your city in order to run the city more efficiently. Now, so analysis and visualization, big data is, I would say, is a hot topic because is a new field because we cannot use the traditional tools we had to visualize or analyze this data. Now, about the risks, yes, I think there are risks. Some of them we discussed in the previous panel, during lunch, during the break. You know, is the fact, it's something that it's not about this, it's not about cities, it's not about architecture, it's not about design, it's really about our lives. And the fact that today everything gets digitized, and we are creating a world where it's going to be impossible to forget. But that's a big conversation, maybe, you know, there's not enough time, I think. But, you know, but that's something we should all be aware. And, you know, there's many solutions. I think we should all participate to that debate. We organized a conference called Engaging Data at MIT to do that with Noam Chomsky, with the lawyer, Snowden's lawyer, and so on, just a few months ago at MIT. It's very important that we will take part because, you know, I don't know what the solution is, but what I know is that the society we'll have tomorrow depends on the choices today we make together. Yeah. Thanks. I'll give you my right.
That's great.
Thanks.
Thank you.